My name is Camille Carter, and the night my family finally invited me to sit at their table was the same night I realized they had never considered me family at all. For most of my life, I was the person nobody in the Carter family talked about, unless they needed a joke. My mother loved introducing my older brother Desmond, the successful businessman. She loved bragging about my sister Vanessa, the attorney who appeared on local television. My cousins were surgeons, investors, politicians, and executives. Then there was me. I owned a small construction company. I worked with contractors, blueprints, permits, and job sites. I spent more time wearing steel-toe boots than designer shoes. According to my family, that made me the embarrassment of the Carter name. For years, I stopped expecting their approval. It was easier that way. You can't be disappointed by people when you stop believing they'll ever change. That's why I was shocked when my mother called me personally one Thursday afternoon. She never called unless she wanted something. "Camille," she said, unusually cheerful. "We're having a family gala next Saturday. Everyone will be there. We'd love for you to come." I nearly dropped the phone. A family gala? An invitation? From my mother? For a moment, I honestly wondered if she had dialed the wrong number. "You want me there?" I asked. "Of course," she replied. "Your family." Those two words hit harder than they should have. Your family. It had been years since anyone in my family made me feel like that was true. When the call ended, I sat in my office staring at the wall for nearly 10 minutes. Maybe people could change. Maybe age softened old grudges. Maybe my mother had finally realized how much damage she'd done over the years. Or maybe I was a fool. Unfortunately, hope has a way of making smart people ignore warning signs. The first warning arrived 2 days later. My fiancé, Darius, didn't seem excited when I told him about the invitation. Most people would have been happy. Instead, he looked uncomfortable. "That's surprising," he said. "What is?" "Your family suddenly wanting you around." Something about his tone bothered me. "You don't think it's genuine?" Darius immediately looked away. I didn't say that. But he didn't say it was genuine either. The second warning came when my cousin Olivia accidentally sent me a group message that clearly wasn't meant for me. My name appeared in the conversation several times. The message disappeared before I could read everything. But I saw enough. Someone had written, "Do we really have to pretend all night?" A few seconds later, the message vanished. No explanation followed. When I asked Olivia about it, she claimed it was a misunderstanding. I knew she was lying. Still, I ignored the feeling in my stomach. I wanted the invitation to mean something. I wanted to believe my family was finally giving me a chance. Looking back, that's the part that embarrasses me most. Not what they did. The fact that I actually believed them. The gala took place at one of the most expensive hotels in the city. The kind of place where people cared more about appearances than honesty. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Valets parked luxury cars outside. Every guest seemed to know exactly how much money everyone else had. The moment I entered the ballroom, I understood I had made a mistake. Conversations stopped. Not all of them, just enough. People looked at me the way people look at someone who accidentally walked into the wrong room. Several relatives offered polite smiles that never reached their eyes. Others barely acknowledged me at all. Then I saw my mother. She was standing near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by donors, business owners, and local politicians. When she noticed me, she smiled. But it wasn't the smile of someone happy to see her daughter. It was the smile of someone watching a plan unfold exactly as expected. "Camille," she announced loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "You made it." She hugged me for the first time in years. The gesture should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt rehearsed. Throughout the evening, I noticed something strange. Everyone seemed to know something I didn't. Conversations stopped when I approached. Relatives exchanged glances. Several people struggled not to smile during moments that weren't remotely funny. Every instinct told me something was wrong. Then came the introductions. My mother stepped onto a small stage near the front of the ballroom and welcomed everyone. One by one, she recognized family members and celebrated their accomplishments. Vanessa received applause for winning a major legal case. Desmond received applause for expanding his investment company. Several cousins were praised for professional achievements. Then she reached my name. "And of course," she said, pausing dramatically, "we have Camille." A few people politely clapped. My mother smiled. Camille has always chosen a different path. The room grew quiet. While the rest of the family pursued professional careers, Camille prefers working with her hands. Laughter erupted from several tables. Not loud laughter, the worst kind. Controlled laughter, polite laughter, the kind people use when they know they're witnessing a joke at someone else's expense. My face burned. My mother continued smiling. We may not always understand her choices, she added, but every family needs diversity. More laughter followed. I looked toward Darius. He didn't say a word. He didn't stand up. He didn't defend me. He simply stared at his glass and pretended not to notice what was happening. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Not enough to leave. Not yet. But enough to recognize that whatever this evening was supposed to be, it wasn't reconciliation. The rest of the gala felt endless. Every conversation seemed designed to remind me I didn't belong. Every compliment carried an insult hidden inside it. Every smile felt fake. By the time the event finally ended, I wanted nothing more than to go home. That's when I heard the conversation that changed everything. I was walking toward the exit when I realized I had left my purse near one of the private conference rooms. As I approached the hallway, I heard voices inside. One belonged to Desmond, the other belonged to someone I couldn't identify. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. Then I heard my own name. I stopped immediately. She still doesn't know? The stranger asked. Desmond laughed softly. Not even close. My stomach tightened. The stranger lowered his voice. And tomorrow? There was a brief pause. Then Desmond answered with complete confidence. Tomorrow everything finally becomes ours. Silence followed. Then both men laughed. I stood frozen outside the door, staring at the empty hallway, suddenly realizing that whatever game my family was playing, I had just become part of it. The problem was that I still had no idea what they were trying to take. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Desmond's voice again. Tomorrow, everything finally becomes ours. The sentence repeated in my head like a warning I couldn't ignore. At first, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe they were discussing a business deal unrelated to me. Maybe years of being treated like an outsider had made me suspicious. But deep down, I knew better. People don't lower their voices and laugh about something becoming ours unless they're hiding it from someone. And based on the timing, that someone was probably me. The next morning I woke up determined to find out what Desmond was talking about. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted another argument with my family. I simply wanted the truth. My father had been gone for almost 6 years. He wasn't perfect, but he was the only person in my family who never made me feel small. When everyone else compared me to lawyers and executives, he told me there was dignity in building things with my own hands. When I started my construction company, he was the first person who believed I could succeed. After he passed away, I tried avoiding discussions about family assets and inheritance. Money had a way of turning relatives into strangers. I wanted no part of it. Looking back, that decision may have been my biggest mistake. Around noon, I visited a storage property my father used to own. Most people in the family had forgotten it existed. It wasn't valuable compared to the larger holdings Desmond constantly talked about. It was just an old warehouse containing boxes, furniture, and decades of records nobody cared enough to organize. My father used to keep everything: tax records, contracts, correspondence, meeting notes. If there was a secret hidden somewhere, there was a chance he left clues behind. The warehouse smelled like dust and old paper. Sunlight filtered through high windows as I moved between shelves stacked with boxes. Several hours passed before I found anything remotely interesting. Most documents involved ordinary business operations, construction projects, vendor agreements, property maintenance records. Nothing unusual. Then I discovered a locked filing cabinet pushed against the far wall. I almost ignored it. The cabinet looked old enough to be worthless, but something about it caught my attention. After searching through nearby drawers, I found a small envelope taped beneath a shelf. Inside sat a key. The cabinet opened immediately. What I found inside changed everything. The drawers contained folders marked with my father's handwriting. One label stood out instantly: Family Holdings. My pulse accelerated. I carried the folder to a nearby table and opened it carefully. Inside sat documents related to several family-owned assets. Some I recognized, others I had never heard of. Then I found repeated references to a commercial property called Carter Plaza. The name sounded familiar. Very familiar. After several minutes, I remembered why. Carter Plaza was the family's most valuable asset. A mixed-use commercial property located downtown. Office tenants, retail space, long-term leases. The property generated millions in revenue every year. My father had spent decades developing it. According to family lore, Carter Plaza was the crown jewel of everything he built. I continued reading. That's when confusion set in. Several documents suggested ownership interests were divided differently than I remembered hearing after his death. Much differently. Certain percentages appeared assigned to beneficiaries whose names surprised me, including mine. I read the documents twice, then a third time. The numbers didn't make sense. Or rather, they didn't match the version of reality my family had been describing for years. My understanding had always been simple. Desmond managed the major family assets. Vanessa handled legal matters. Everyone else received smaller distributions. That was the story. Yet the records sitting in front of me suggested something entirely different. Before I could continue, my phone rang. Darius. I answered immediately. Hey, where are you? He asked. Something about his tone sounded tense. At one of my father's storage properties. A pause followed. Why? The question felt strange. Just looking through old records. Another pause. Longer this time. Camille, maybe you should leave that stuff alone. I frowned. Why would I do that? Because it's old paperwork. His answer came too quickly. Nothing good comes from digging through the past. My stomach tightened. Darius normally avoided family discussions, yet suddenly he seemed very interested in what I was doing. Did someone ask you to call me? I asked. Silence. Then he laughed awkwardly. What? No. He was lying. I couldn't prove it. But I knew it. We ended the conversation a few minutes later, and the uneasy feeling remained. Darius knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. I returned to the documents. The deeper I dug, the stranger things became. Several pages were missing from key sections. Entire sequences appeared incomplete. References pointed toward attachments that no longer existed. Certain folders showed signs of having been accessed repeatedly, while others remained untouched. It felt less like a forgotten archive and more like a library someone had quietly edited over time. Then I found something that made my heart start pounding. A memorandum written by my father roughly 8 months before his death. The document referenced future ownership protections and beneficiary safeguards. My name appeared multiple times. So did Desmond's. The language wasn't entirely clear, but one thing became obvious. My father expected both of us to have important roles regarding Carter Plaza. Not just Desmond. Both of us. Yet that wasn't what happened after he died. At least not publicly. I searched every box near the cabinet looking for additional pages. Eventually I found another folder referencing the same memorandum. Relief washed over me. Finally, I thought. Answers. Instead, I found another mystery. The folder index listed 7 supporting documents. Only 6 remained inside. One document was missing. Completely missing. The absence immediately stood out because someone had removed it carefully. Not lost it. Removed it. The numbering sequence skipped directly from page 6 to page 8. Someone wanted that specific document gone. I sat back in my chair, staring at the empty space where it should have been. My father had spent his entire life planning for the future. He documented everything. He anticipated problems. He protected people. The idea that an important inheritance document simply disappeared on its own felt impossible. As the afternoon turned into evening, I photographed everything and organized copies for later review. Then I noticed something else. A beneficiary summary sheet tucked inside the back of a folder. At first glance, it looked routine. Then I read it carefully. My pulse stopped. I checked it again. Then again. There had to be a mistake. There wasn't. According to older records, my name occupied a position that no longer appeared in any of the more recent documents. Not reduced, not adjusted. Gone. Completely gone. I stared at the page as a cold feeling settled into my chest. Suddenly, Desmond's words from the night before returned. Tomorrow, everything finally becomes ours. For the first time, I stopped wondering what they were trying to take. I started wondering whether they had already taken it. The moment I discovered my name had disappeared from documents where it clearly used to exist, I stopped treating the situation as a family misunderstanding. Something had happened. Whether it was incompetence, greed, or outright fraud, I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My father had never spent his entire life building Carter Plaza, just so important records could mysteriously lose pages after his death. The next morning, I returned to the warehouse before sunrise. I wanted to review everything again while my thoughts were still clear. People often imagine that major secrets reveal themselves in dramatic moments. In reality, most investigations begin with confusion. You find one inconsistency, then another, then another. Eventually, those inconsistencies start forming a pattern. I spent nearly 4 hours reviewing every document connected to Carter Plaza. The more I read, the less sense my family's version of events made. My father documented everything obsessively, every meeting, every decision, every amendment. Yet the period immediately following his death looked strangely incomplete. Entire sections contained gaps. Several important files appeared to have been reorganized. Most concerning of all, certain references pointed toward meetings and discussions I had no memory of attending. Around noon, I found the name of a man I hadn't thought about in years. Martin Ellison, my father's longtime estate attorney. Martin handled legal matters for the family for almost 2 decades before retiring. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral. The phone number listed in the records was outdated, but after some searching, I eventually located a current one. I wasn't sure he'd even remember me. He answered on the third ring. Martin Ellison. Mr. Ellison, this is Camille Carter. Silence followed. Then a warm laugh. Camille? Good Lord, it's been years. We spoke briefly before I explained why I was calling. The moment I mentioned Carter Plaza, the tone of the conversation changed. Not suspicious. Careful. What exactly are you looking for? He asked. The truth. Another pause followed. That's a dangerous answer. An hour later, I found myself sitting across from him in a small office overlooking downtown. Time had aged him, but not dramatically. His sharp eyes remained exactly as I remembered. After listening to my concerns, he folded his hands together and studied me carefully. Let me ask you something, he said. How much do you know about what happened after your father died? Not much, I admitted. Desmond handled most of it. Martin nodded slowly. I suspected that. His response immediately caught my attention. What does that mean? He leaned back in his chair. Your father's death happened suddenly. Everyone was grieving. Desmond stepped forward and offered to coordinate the transition process. Most people accepted that arrangement because it seemed practical. I felt my stomach tighten, including me, including you. Martin wasn't accusing me. He was stating a fact. And unfortunately, he was right. During that period, I trusted my family completely. I signed papers when asked, attended meetings when necessary, ignored financial discussions because I assumed everyone was acting in good faith. Looking back, it felt naive. At the time, it felt like trust. Martin opened a storage box and removed several folders. There was a family review meeting approximately 6 weeks after your father's funeral. I frowned. I don't remember that. You weren't there. That answer hit me harder than expected. What? Martin opened one of the folders and slid a document across the desk. You were invited. My eyes moved across the page. Sure enough, my name appeared on the attendance list. Then I noticed something else. Next to my name was a handwritten note. Unable to attend. I stared at the words. I never wrote this. Martin nodded slowly. I didn't think you did. The room suddenly felt smaller. So someone told everyone I wasn't coming? Apparently. My pulse accelerated. Because that meeting mattered. A lot. According to the records Martin showed me, several important discussions occurred that day. Asset oversight, beneficiary coordination, management authority, future control structures, subjects directly connected to Carter Plaza, subjects I should have been involved in. Instead, decisions moved forward without me. Why didn't you call? I asked quietly. Martin sighed. Because I was told you already knew. Another lie. Another carefully placed lie. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Martin continued searching through the files before eventually removing another folder. His expression changed slightly. "This may interest you." He handed it to me. The label immediately caught my eye. Supplemental beneficiary provisions. My pulse quickened. "What is this?" "Part of a document package your father requested before his death." I opened the folder. Most of the paperwork was legal language. Dense, technical, difficult to read quickly. Then I found a section discussing governance protections connected to Carter Plaza. Several clauses had been highlighted. I read them twice before looking up. "This says major ownership decisions require multiple approvals." Martin nodded. "Correct. Not just Desmond's?" "No." My heart started pounding. "Then why has everyone acted like he controls everything?" Martin remained silent for a moment. "That's a question I've been asking myself for years." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The implication hung heavily between us. My father hadn't designed Carter Plaza to be controlled by one person. He specifically created safeguards to prevent exactly that situation. Yet somehow, those safeguards had disappeared from the family narrative. Then Martin showed me something even more important. There was another attachment originally included with this package. I immediately leaned forward. "The missing document?" He nodded. "I don't have the original." Disappointment hit instantly. Then he smiled slightly. "But I might have something better." My pulse accelerated. Martin opened a separate archive box and removed a photocopy. "Lawyers keep copies of everything." For the first time all day, I almost laughed. He handed me the pages. The document wasn't complete. Several sections were missing, but enough remained to understand its purpose. My father had clearly stated that no individual beneficiary should ever exercise unilateral control over Carter Plaza without oversight from other designated parties, including me. I stared at the words for several moments. The significance was enormous. For years, Desmond had behaved like the undisputed authority over the family's most valuable asset. Yet according to my father's own instructions, that was never supposed to happen. "Does my family know this exists?" I asked. Martin's expression answered before he spoke. "Someone certainly did." The drive home felt surreal. For the first time, I wasn't dealing with suspicions. I had evidence, not enough to prove wrongdoing. Not yet, but enough to prove my father intended something very different from what eventually occurred. Around 6 o'clock that evening, Darius arrived at my house unexpectedly. The moment I opened the door, I knew something was off. He wasn't there to see me. He was there to gather information. "How was your day?" he asked casually. Too casually. "Busy." "Still looking through old records?" There it was, the question he'd really come to ask. I smiled politely. "Why?" "Just curious." Another lie. We sat in the kitchen for nearly an hour. Throughout the entire conversation, Darius kept steering things back toward the same topic. My father, Carter Plaza, estate records, family meetings. The pattern became impossible to miss. Eventually he left, but the uneasy feeling remained. Whatever Desmond was hiding, Darius knew enough to be nervous. Later that night, I spread the copied documents across my dining room table and began comparing them against the records from the warehouse. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One signature page looked wrong. Not obviously fake. Not amateurish. Just wrong. The signature belonged to a key inheritance amendment executed shortly after my father's death. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Then I compared it against older records. The spacing was different. The pressure marks were different. Even the flow of certain letters looked unnatural. I wasn't a handwriting expert, but I spent years reviewing contracts in construction. Something about that signature felt manufactured. I stared at it for nearly 10 minutes before finally leaning back in my chair. If I was right, the problem wasn't missing documents anymore. The problem was that someone may have altered the documents that remained. For 3 days, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Maybe the missing document had an innocent explanation. Maybe the strange signature was simply the result of poor photocopy quality. Maybe years of family politics had made me suspicious of things that weren't actually there. The problem was that every time I reviewed the evidence, the same conclusion appeared. Too many things were wrong at the same time. My father's safeguards had disappeared. Important meetings happened without me. Documents were missing. Signatures looked questionable, and Darius was behaving like a man who knew something he desperately didn't want me to discover. By the fourth day, I stopped asking whether there was a problem. I started asking how big the problem really was. That's when I called Rebecca Nolan. Rebecca wasn't a private investigator. She wasn't a lawyer either. She was a forensic accountant. We met years earlier during a construction dispute involving a contractor who had been hiding money through several shell companies. Rebecca had found the missing funds in less than a week. If someone was moving money around Carter Plaza, she was exactly the person I needed. We met at a small coffee shop near downtown. I brought copies of everything I had collected so far: family records, ownership summaries, the missing document references, the inheritance paperwork. Rebecca spent nearly an hour reading without speaking. Finally, she closed the folder and looked directly at me. "How much do you trust your brother?" The question caught me off guard. "Right now?" She nodded. I thought about it for several seconds. "Less than I did a week ago." Rebecca leaned back. "Good." I frowned. "Good? Because if you're going to investigate this properly, you can't start with assumptions." She tapped the paperwork. "You need facts." That answer sounded exactly like Rebecca. By the end of the meeting, she agreed to review public filings, corporate disclosures, property records, and financial statements connected to Carter Plaza. She wasn't looking for crimes, she was looking for patterns. Sometimes patterns are more revealing than evidence. The first few days produced very little. Carter Plaza appeared successful from the outside. Occupancy rates were strong. Rental income looked healthy. Property values continued rising. The public narrative matched what my family had always claimed. Desmond was supposedly a brilliant manager protecting the family's most valuable asset. Then Rebecca called late on a Tuesday afternoon. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something had changed. "Are you sitting down?" My stomach tightened immediately. Should I be? Probably. 20 minutes later, I arrived at her office. Several spreadsheets covered a conference table: financial reports, corporate filings, tax summaries, property records. Rebecca pointed toward a section highlighted in yellow. "Do you know what this is?" I studied the document. No, neither did I. That wasn't reassuring. She explained that several payments connected to Carter Plaza had been routed through consulting entities neither of us recognized. The amounts weren't enormous individually: 20,000 here, 30,000 there, 15,000 somewhere else. But over time, they added up. A lot. "How much?" I asked. Rebecca slid another report across the table. The total sat near the bottom of the page. My pulse accelerated. More than $1 million had moved through entities with almost no visible operational activity. "What exactly do these companies do?" I asked. Rebecca smiled without humor. "That's the interesting part." She tapped several records. "As far as I can tell, almost nothing." The room suddenly felt colder. Missing money wasn't proof of wrongdoing. There are legitimate reasons companies pay consultants, but legitimate consultants usually leave evidence behind: websites, employees, contracts, deliverables. These companies seem to leave almost nothing. Rebecca continued digging. The deeper she went, the stranger things became. Several entities shared mailing addresses. Others used the same registered agents. Some appeared and disappeared within remarkably short periods of time. Individually, none of it proved fraud. Together, it suggested something worth investigating. Then another surprise surfaced. Several payments connected to those entities eventually flowed toward accounts associated with businesses controlled by Desmond. Not directly. Never directly. The money moved through multiple layers first. But the pattern existed. Rebecca looked at me carefully. "Your brother is either the unluckiest businessman in America," she paused, "or someone worked very hard to make these transactions difficult to follow." Neither possibility made me feel better. That evening, I received another unexpected visit from Darius. The timing alone made me uncomfortable. I hadn't told him about Rebecca. I hadn't discussed the financial review with anyone. Yet somehow he kept appearing whenever I got close to something important. We were sitting in my kitchen when he casually mentioned Desmond. "He's under a lot of pressure lately." My eyes narrowed immediately. "Pressure from what?" Darius shrugged. "Business stuff." That answer wasn't good enough anymore. "What business stuff?" Another shrug. "I don't know the details." Lie. I knew it instantly. Darius wasn't a good liar. He always looked away half a second too early, always changed subjects too quickly. The same signs appeared now. You seem very interested in protecting Desmond. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Darius froze. Not dramatically, just enough. I'm not protecting anyone. Then why do you keep showing up every time I ask questions? For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he stood. You're imagining things. That response told me everything. Innocent people answer questions. Guilty people avoid them. After he left, I sat alone in my kitchen for nearly an hour thinking about the conversation. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, Darius knew more than he admitted. The only question was how much more. 2 days later, Rebecca called again. This time she sounded concerned. Not curious, concerned. I found something you need to see. I arrived at her office less than an hour later. She handed me a stack of documents and pointed toward a specific filing. Look at the collateral section. I scanned the page, then scanned it again. My stomach dropped. What is this? Rebecca folded her arms. A loan. My pulse accelerated. A loan secured by what? She didn't answer immediately. She didn't have to. I already saw it. Carter Plaza. The property itself had been pledged as collateral. For several seconds I couldn't speak. How much? Rebecca handed me another document. The number printed across the page made my heart stop. Millions. Not thousands. Not hundreds of thousands. Millions. I've never heard about this. I know. My mind raced through every family meeting, every conversation, every discussion involving Carter Plaza. Nobody had ever mentioned a major loan. Nobody had ever discussed debt attached to the property. The asset everyone treated like a crown jewel suddenly looked very different. Who approved this? I asked. Rebecca shook her head. That's what I'm trying to determine. The situation became even stranger when she showed me the timeline. The debt didn't appear ancient. It wasn't something my father created decades ago. Most of it appeared after his death, after Desmond assumed operational control. After the meetings I never attended, after the missing documents, piece by piece, the puzzle was starting to form, and I didn't like the picture. Then Rebecca showed me one final report. Several obligations tied to the loan were approaching critical deadlines, renewal dates, compliance requirements, financial thresholds, the kind of deadlines lenders take seriously. Suddenly, Desmond's behavior made more sense. The secrecy, the missing paperwork, the pressure, the urgency. If Carter Plaza carried that much debt, then the property wasn't merely an inheritance. It was a lifeline someone might be willing to protect at any cost. I stared at the spreadsheets spread across the table. Missing money, hidden entities, unexplained transfers, massive debt. The family asset I spent years ignoring was beginning to look like the center of something much larger than inheritance disputes. Rebecca remained quiet for several moments before finally speaking. Camille. I looked up. Her expression had changed. The curiosity was gone. The caution was gone. What remained was concern. Real concern. I think your brother has a serious problem. And for the first time, I began wondering if the problem wasn't just financial. Maybe Desmond wasn't trying to control Carter Plaza because he wanted more power. Maybe he was trying to control it because he was running out of options. For nearly a week after Rebecca discovered the hidden loan, I lived in a strange state somewhere between anger and disbelief. Every new piece of information seemed impossible until the next piece made it look small. At first I thought I was uncovering an inheritance dispute. Then I thought I was uncovering financial mismanagement. By the beginning of the following week, I was starting to realize something much worse. Carter Plaza wasn't the prize. Carter Plaza was the rescue boat. And someone was desperately trying to get on board before the ship sank. Rebecca spent most of those days tracing financial connections. The deeper she went, the less impressive Desmond's empire appeared. Publicly, he was everything my family believed him to be. Successful, wealthy, influential, the son my mother never stopped bragging about, the man whose picture appeared in local business magazines, the man introduced at family gatherings as proof of what a Carter could achieve. Behind the scenes, the numbers told a very different story. We met again on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Rebecca's office conference table was covered with files, not dozens, hundreds, corporate registrations, financial disclosures, tax records, property filings, loan agreements, bankruptcy notices involving unrelated companies. The amount of information was overwhelming. Rebecca looked exhausted, which immediately worried me. Rebecca enjoyed solving puzzles. If she looked concerned, the puzzle wasn't good. "Tell me something positive," I said as I sat down. She stared at me for several seconds. "I found the truth." My stomach tightened. "And?" she sighed. "You probably aren't going to like it." That answer alone told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca opened a report and slid it toward me. "Let's start with the companies." I began reading. One by one, she walked me through the businesses connected to Desmond. Some were real, some generated revenue, some owned assets, but many existed mostly on paper. Their public image looked impressive. Their financial performance did not. Several companies reported losses for years. Others survived through refinancing. A few appeared dependent on new loans simply to maintain operations. "This can't be right," I said. Rebecca didn't respond immediately. I checked everything twice. I looked at the numbers again, then a third time. They didn't change. For years, my family treated Desmond like a financial genius, yet several of his businesses were barely surviving. "Why would nobody notice?" I asked. Rebecca almost laughed. "Because people see headlines." She pointed toward a stack of magazine articles. "They see conferences, awards, interviews, social media. Success is easy to sell when nobody checks the accounting." The statement stayed with me. Success is easy to sell when nobody checks the accounting. Suddenly, dozens of memories looked different. Family dinners, charity events, business celebrations. Every story Desmond told, every achievement my mother repeated, every speech about leadership and growth. We had all been looking at the packaging instead of the product. Then Rebecca showed me the real problem: the debt structure. At first, the charts looked confusing. Multiple lenders, multiple entities, multiple obligations. Then the pattern emerged. Most of the businesses weren't operating independently. They were supporting each other. Loans from one company covered losses in another. Assets from one property secured obligations somewhere else. Revenue from successful operations helped keep struggling ventures alive. It resembled a row of dominoes balanced against one another. As long as nothing fell, everything appeared stable. If one piece collapsed, the damage would spread quickly. "How much debt are we talking about?" I asked quietly. Rebecca handed me a summary page. The number nearly took my breath away. It wasn't a few $1,000,000. It was substantially more. The exact amount mattered less than the reality behind it. Desmond wasn't managing a successful empire. He was managing a mountain of obligations. A mountain growing heavier every year. "How is he still operating?" I asked. Rebecca pointed toward another section. Refinancing, extensions, restructuring, new loans replacing old loans. The financial equivalent of running on a treadmill that kept speeding up. "This has been happening for years," she said, "long before you started asking questions." That realization hit hard, because it meant the gala wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the end. Desmond had already been fighting this battle for years. I spent the next several days reviewing everything Rebecca uncovered. The more I learned, the clearer the picture became. Carter Plaza occupied a unique position inside the system. Unlike many of Desmond's other ventures, it generated reliable income. Strong income, predictable income. Lenders trusted it. Investors respected it. Banks valued it. If someone gained complete control over Carter Plaza, they gained access to the strongest asset in the entire structure. For the first time, I truly understood why my father protected it so carefully, not because it was valuable, because it was powerful. Then something happened that changed my understanding of the situation completely. I attended a family charity event hosted by my mother. Normally, I avoided those gatherings. This time I wanted to observe, not participate. Observe. What I saw surprised me. My mother genuinely believed Desmond was thriving. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't lying. She actually believed it. Throughout the evening, she proudly told guests about future expansion plans, new investments, new opportunities, new projects. Every claim sounded confident. Every prediction sounded optimistic. Yet I now knew the numbers behind the curtain. The realization created an unexpected shift in my thinking. My mother wasn't the architect of the deception. She was another audience member. Desmond wasn't just selling success to investors, he was selling it to his own family. That discovery made the situation more complicated, and somehow more dangerous. Several days later, Rebecca called with another update. "You need to see this." The phrase had become alarmingly common. We met that evening. She handed me a packet of documents tied to one of the larger loan agreements. I immediately recognized the lender's name. Not because I knew them personally, because they specialized in distressed financing, high-risk lending, expensive lending, the kind of funding people seek when traditional options disappear. My pulse accelerated as I read. Desmond borrowed from these people? Rebecca nodded. More than once. I kept reading. The terms were brutal. Interest rates, performance requirements, reporting obligations, default triggers. Everything about the agreement screamed desperation. Successful people don't accept terms like these unless they have no better choice. Then I reached a section discussing collateral support. Carter Plaza appeared again, not as the only asset, but as the most important one, the strongest one, the one lenders cared about most. My stomach tightened. So if he loses control of Carter Plaza, Rebecca finished the sentence, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. We sat in silence for several moments. Suddenly, every strange decision made sense. The missing documents, the altered records, the pressure, the secrecy, the family gala, the comments I overheard outside the conference room. Desmond wasn't trying to become richer. He was trying to survive. Unfortunately, survival doesn't excuse fraud. If anything, desperation often explains why fraud happens in the first place. Then Rebecca opened one final file. Her expression immediately told me this was the most important discovery yet. I found a compliance schedule attached to one of the loan packages. I studied the paperwork. At first, nothing stood out. Then I saw the dates. My pulse accelerated. "When is this?" Rebecca folded her arms. 3 weeks. I looked up. 3 weeks? She nodded. Several major obligations come due in approximately 3 weeks. The room suddenly felt very quiet. 3 weeks wasn't a distant problem. 3 weeks wasn't a future crisis. 3 weeks was now. If Desmond failed to satisfy those obligations, consequences would begin immediately, not months later. Not next year, immediately. I stared at the deadline while pieces of the puzzle continued sliding into place. The gala invitation, the missing inheritance documents, the sudden urgency surrounding Carter Plaza, the secret meetings, the strange behavior. None of it was random. Someone was racing against the clock. Rebecca watched me carefully before speaking. "Camille." I looked up. "What?" For several seconds she remained silent. Then she delivered the sentence that stayed with me long after I left her office. "I don't think your brother is protecting the family empire." She paused. "I think he's trying to save himself before everything collapses." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I wasn't investigating a successful man hiding secrets. I was investigating a desperate man running out of time. The worst part about discovering a betrayal isn't the moment you learn the truth, it's the period right before it, when your instincts are screaming that something is wrong and your heart keeps inventing reasons to ignore them. For nearly a week after Rebecca revealed the extent of Desmond's debt problems, I found myself doing exactly that. Every suspicious thing Darius had done suddenly looked different. Every strange conversation, every attempt to discourage my investigation, every unexpected visit. Yet I kept searching for alternative explanations, because once you accept that someone you love has betrayed you, there is no going back. Rebecca wasn't interested in alternative explanations. She was interested in evidence. A few days after our meeting about the loan deadlines, she called and asked me to stop by her office. The moment I arrived, I noticed several new folders sitting on the conference table. My stomach tightened immediately. "What did you find?" Rebecca hesitated. That alone worried me. Rebecca normally delivered information without emotion. This time she looked uncomfortable. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand something." My pulse accelerated. "That sounds bad." "It might be." She opened a folder and turned it toward me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw the names attached to several email records obtained through publicly accessible litigation filings connected to one of Desmond's companies. My eyes stopped on a familiar name, Darius Walker. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. No. The word escaped automatically. Rebecca didn't respond. No, I repeated. There has to be another explanation. Because there had to be. Darius wasn't just my fiancé. He was the person who sat beside me during family holidays. The person who talked about our future. The person I planned to marry. The idea that his name appeared inside communications connected to Desmond's financial problems felt impossible. Rebecca spoke carefully. I'm not saying he's guilty of anything. She pointed toward the emails. I'm saying he was involved in discussions. I picked up the documents and began reading. Most of the messages weren't dramatic. No smoking gun, no confession, just coordination. Meeting schedules, property discussions, financial updates, conversations that clearly should have had nothing to do with Darius. Yet there he was, again and again. My chest tightened with every page. Why would he be involved? Rebecca leaned back. That's the question. The drive home felt like a blur. For years, Darius had been the one stable thing in my life. Whenever my family made me feel small, he reminded me that my work mattered. Whenever my mother compared me to Desmond, he told me I didn't need anyone's approval. At least that's what I believed. Suddenly, every memory felt unreliable. By the time I reached home, I had convinced myself Rebecca was mistaken. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe Darius was helping with a business project. Maybe Desmond asked for advice. Maybe the emails looked worse than they actually were. Then I opened my laptop and started reviewing old messages. That's when the pattern appeared. The first example seemed harmless. Months earlier, I mentioned reviewing some of my father's old estate records. Darius immediately changed the subject. At the time, I thought nothing of it. The second example felt worse. Several weeks later, I told him I planned to ask questions about Carter Plaza. He spent nearly an hour explaining why digging into family finances would only create conflict. The third example hit hardest. Shortly after I received the gala invitation, Darius repeatedly encouraged me to focus on wedding planning instead of family matters. One memory after another resurfaced. Separately, they looked innocent. Together, they formed a pattern. Every time I moved closer to Carter Plaza, Darius tried steering me away. The realization made me physically sick. 2 days later, Rebecca called again. I found more. Those 3 words now filled me with dread. This time the evidence looked worse, much worse. Several calendar entries connected Darius and Desmond to private meetings stretching back nearly a year. Not one meeting, not 2. Multiple meetings, repeated meetings. Some occurred during periods when Darius specifically told me he was traveling for work. Others happened on evenings he claimed to be meeting clients. My stomach turned. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was deception. Deliberate deception. How long? I asked quietly. Rebecca glanced at the records. Long enough. The answer hurt more than I expected. Not because of the meetings themselves, because of what they represented. Every secret meeting required a lie. Every lie required a decision. Darius hadn't accidentally hidden these conversations. He chose to hide them. Again and again. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I knew I needed answers directly from him. Not from documents, not from Rebecca, from him. I invited Darius over for dinner. The moment he walked through the door, I could tell he sensed something was wrong. Everything okay? He asked. Sit down. His expression changed immediately. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we had discussed wedding venues, honeymoon plans, and future dreams. Suddenly, it felt like a stranger's house. Have you been meeting with Desmond? I asked. The question landed like a hammer. For a fraction of a second, panic crossed his face. Then it disappeared. What? Too fast, too defensive. Have you been meeting with Desmond? I repeated. Of course. He forced a laugh. He's your brother. Lie. I knew it immediately. Not because of the words, because of the fear behind them. How often? Another pause. I don't know. Lie. About what? Normal stuff. Lie. Business? Sometimes. Lie. Every answer sounded worse than the one before it. Finally, I placed copies of the calendar records on the table. The color drained from his face. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked away. And that told me everything. Innocent people don't look away from evidence. Tell me the truth. My voice barely sounded like my own. Darius stared at the documents. It's not what you think. The oldest sentence in the history of guilty people. Then what is it? Silence. Darius. More silence. Finally, he exhaled heavily. Desmond needed help. My heart sank. Not because of the words. Because he wasn't denying it anymore. Help with what? The businesses. The debt? Another pause. Then a nod. I felt something inside me crack. You knew? He closed his eyes briefly. Some of it. Some of it. As if that somehow made things better. How long? I asked. Months. Months. While helping me choose wedding invitations. While discussing our future. While promising there were no secrets between us. Months. I stood and walked toward the window because I couldn't look at him anymore. Why? The question came out broken. Why would you do this? Darius remained silent for several moments. When he finally answered, his voice sounded small. Because he promised he could make everything work. I turned around slowly. What does that mean? His eyes dropped toward the table. If Carter Plaza came under his control, he planned to restructure everything. My pulse accelerated. And? Darius didn't answer. And what? I demanded. Finally, he looked up. The shame on his face told me the truth before the words arrived. He offered me a position. Silence filled the room. A position? Executive operations. I stared at him. The man I planned to marry had helped my brother work against me for a job title, for money, for opportunity. Every painful discovery over the past several weeks suddenly became personal. This wasn't just Desmond's betrayal anymore. It belonged to Darius too. Then I remembered something Rebecca had shown me earlier that afternoon. One final record I hadn't mentioned. Slowly, I walked back to the table and placed another document in front of him. The moment he saw it, his face turned pale. Attendance records from a private strategy meeting involving Carter Plaza. The date sat clearly at the top of the page. 8 months earlier. Long before the gala. Long before my investigation. Long before any of this became public. Darius stared at the page without speaking. Because he couldn't. His name was listed among the attendees. The same period when he was helping me plan our wedding. The same period when he was telling me we would always be honest with each other. I looked at him for several seconds before finally asking the only question that mattered. How long were you pretending to be on my side? And the silence that followed was answer enough. For 2 days after my confrontation with Darius, I barely spoke to anyone. Not because I was confused anymore. The confusion was gone. What remained was grief. There is a unique kind of pain that comes from realizing someone didn't betray you in a single moment. They betrayed you repeatedly. Every lie required a choice. Every secret meeting required another choice. Every conversation where Darius looked me in the eyes and promised we had no secrets required another choice. By the end, I wasn't mourning the relationship. I was mourning the person I thought he was. The strange thing was that the financial investigation suddenly became easier. Not emotionally easier. Logically easier. Because once I stopped defending Darius in my head, the facts started fitting together. Rebecca continued reviewing the debt structure while I focused on the timeline. Instead of asking what happened, I started asking when it happened. That question changed everything. 3 days later, I sat in Rebecca's office reviewing a large wall chart she had created. Dates, meetings, loans, company formations, property filings. At first, it looked overwhelming. Then patterns emerged. Look here, Rebecca said, pointing to a cluster of events from roughly 18 months earlier. I studied the chart. Several things happened within a surprisingly short period. One company borrowed money. Another acquired property. A third refinanced existing obligations. A fourth received consulting payments. What am I looking at? I asked. Rebecca tapped the chart. The beginning. My stomach tightened. The beginning of what? She looked directly at me. The moment Desmond's problems became serious. For several seconds, I stared at the dates. Everything traced back to a period shortly after one of Desmond's largest developments underperformed. Publicly, the project was described as a success. Financially, the numbers suggested something else. Revenue came in below projections. Investors expected better results. Debt remained. New obligations appeared. The dominoes started falling. So that's when this started? Rebecca nodded. As far as I can tell, the realization hit hard, because it meant none of this was spontaneous. The manipulation, the secrecy, the missing documents, the pressure surrounding Carter Plaza. Those weren't emergency decisions. They were the result of a plan developing over more than a year. Then Rebecca showed me something that changed my perspective again. Several of the hidden transfers weren't funding luxury purchases. They weren't paying for yachts, vacation homes, or extravagant lifestyles. Most of the money was being used to cover holes elsewhere: payroll obligations, loan payments, operating expenses, failing projects. Desmond wasn't stealing money to live like a king. He was moving money to keep his empire alive. The distinction mattered, not because it excused him, because it explained him. Desperate people make different decisions than greedy people. And desperation can be far more dangerous. That afternoon, I drove past Carter Plaza for the first time in weeks. I parked across the street and sat inside my car watching people enter and leave the building. Office workers carrying coffee, business owners greeting customers, delivery drivers unloading supplies. Everything looked normal, healthy, stable. My father loved this property because it supported hundreds of people. Jobs, businesses, families. Looking at it now, I finally understood why he protected it so carefully. If Desmond gained complete control over Carter Plaza, he wouldn't simply gain an asset. He would gain access to the one thing capable of delaying the collapse of everything else. Suddenly, my goal became clear. At the beginning of the investigation, I wanted answers. Now I wanted protection. Protection for the building. Protection for the people who depended on it. Protection for the future my father intended. That evening, I received a call from Martin Ellison. "I found something," he said immediately. His voice sounded unusually serious. Less than an hour later, I was sitting in his office. Martin placed a thin folder on his desk. "I wasn't sure it mattered when I first saw it," he said. "Now I think it does." I opened the folder. Inside sat correspondence between legal representatives involved in the estate transition period following my father's death. Most of it looked routine. Then I noticed a familiar name: Darius Walker. My pulse accelerated. Why is he in these records? Martin adjusted his glasses. That's what caught my attention. The correspondence wasn't extensive, but it was enough. Darius wasn't merely communicating with Desmond months ago. He had access to discussions connected to estate matters long before he admitted knowing anything about them, long before our engagement, long before he started telling me to stop asking questions. I felt physically ill reading the dates. The timeline stretched further back than I imagined. Much further. Martin studied my expression carefully. "You didn't know." It wasn't a question. "No." My voice sounded distant. "I didn't." The betrayal somehow felt bigger than it had before. Not because of the money, not because of the meetings, because Darius entered my life carrying information he never intended to share. Then Martin handed me another document. "Read page 3. I turned the page and immediately recognized the significance. Several years earlier, my father had written a private recommendation regarding future oversight of Carter Plaza. The recommendation wasn't legally binding, but it was clear. If unusual circumstances ever threaten the property, additional independent review should occur before any transfer of authority. I stared at the paragraph for several moments. He knew? Martin nodded slowly. Your father worried about concentration of control. My pulse accelerated again. My father had anticipated exactly this kind of problem. Maybe not Desmond specifically, but the risk itself. One person gaining too much influence over a critical asset. The safeguards weren't accidents. They were intentional, carefully designed, deliberately written, which meant removing them would also require deliberate action. The drive home gave me time to think. For weeks I had been reacting, following clues, responding to discoveries. For the first time, I started thinking strategically. Desmond had a plan, Darius had a role, the debt had a deadline, and Carter Plaza sat at the center of everything. If I continued simply collecting information, I would always remain one step behind. Something had to change. The next morning, I called Rebecca before she reached her office. "I have a question. That's usually dangerous, she replied. If Desmond's entire structure depends on Carter Plaza. I paused. What happens if he never gets control of it? Silence followed. Several long seconds passed before Rebecca finally answered. You really want to know? Yes. Another pause. Then she gave me the answer. A lot of people lose money. My stomach tightened. And Desmond? Rebecca didn't hesitate. He loses everything. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Because for the first time, I finally understood the true stakes. This wasn't a fight over inheritance anymore. It wasn't even a fight over ownership. It was a fight over survival. Desmond needed Carter Plaza. Not eventually. Not someday. Soon. Very soon. And that realization led to another, far more disturbing thought. If losing Carter Plaza would destroy him, what exactly was he willing to do to make sure he got it? As I sat staring at my father's documents spread across the dining room table, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no signature, just a single sentence. Stop looking into Carter Plaza before someone gets hurt. I read it twice, then a third time. For the first time since this investigation began, I wasn't looking at financial pressure or legal maneuvering. Someone wanted me afraid, and that meant I was getting closer than they expected. I deleted the anonymous warning without replying. Whoever sent it wanted a reaction. Fear, panic, hesitation. I wasn't going to give them any of those things. More importantly, the message confirmed something I hadn't known before. The investigation was no longer hidden. Someone knew I was asking questions. Someone knew I was getting closer. And judging by the timing, they were worried. The next morning, Rebecca and I shifted our focus away from inheritance documents and towards something far more useful. Money. People lie. Records disappear. Memories change. But money almost always leaves a trail. The question was whether we could follow it before Desmond ran out of time. Rebecca arrived carrying 3 large binders and a laptop loaded with transaction reports. She spread everything across the conference table and immediately pointed toward a flowchart. This is where things start getting interesting. I studied the chart. Several companies I already recognized appeared on the left side. Others were completely unfamiliar. Lines connected them in every direction. Transfers, loans, consulting fees, asset purchases. At first glance, it looked like chaos. Then Rebecca began explaining. Most people investigating financial fraud look for missing money. She tapped the chart. I look for traveling money. My stomach tightened. What's the difference? Rebecca smiled. Missing money disappears. Traveling money comes home. Over the next hour, she walked me through a series of transactions that stretched across multiple companies. A consulting payment left one account. It moved through another business. Then another. Then another. Eventually, portions of the money reappeared inside entities connected to Desmond. Not directly. Never directly. But close enough to see the pattern. He's recycling funds. Rebecca pointed toward a highlighted section, moving money around to create the appearance of stability. The realization hit hard. Several companies that appeared successful weren't generating enough revenue to support themselves. Instead, money from healthier entities was being redirected to cover weaknesses elsewhere. The empire wasn't growing. It was consuming itself. Every new transaction looked less like expansion and more like survival. Then Rebecca showed me something even worse. Several transfers originated from accounts connected to Carter Plaza operations. Not enough to trigger immediate alarms, but enough to matter. My pulse accelerated. He's using revenue from the property? Rebecca nodded. Looks that way. Suddenly, my father's warnings made perfect sense. Carter Plaza wasn't simply valuable. It was reliable. It generated real cash, the kind lenders trusted. The kind struggling businesses desperately needed. Every month, the property continued operating normally. It provided oxygen to a financial system already running out of air. Then Rebecca pointed toward a name I didn't recognize. This person appears repeatedly. I leaned forward. The same name appeared across multiple transactions, multiple approvals, multiple authorizations. Employee? I asked. Rebecca shook her head. No. Attorney? No. My stomach tightened. Then who? Rebecca looked directly at me. That's what I've been trying to figure out. For the next several hours, we dug through public records. The answer eventually appeared in a filing connected to one of Desmond's holding companies. When I saw the name attached to the document, my heart stopped. I knew exactly who it was. Not an accountant, not a lawyer, not a consultant. Family. My cousin Vanessa. For several seconds, I simply stared at the page. Vanessa, the attorney my mother constantly praised, the cousin who spent years acting like she was above family drama, the cousin who always claimed she stayed neutral. Suddenly, her behavior at the gala looked very different. So did several conversations from the past few years. Rebecca watched my reaction carefully. You know her. It wasn't a question. She's family. Saying the words out loud somehow made them worse. Because family meant trust. Family meant access. Family meant information. If Vanessa was involved, the circle around me was much larger than I thought. The betrayal wasn't coming from one person. It was coming from multiple directions. Rebecca continued searching. The more records we reviewed, the clearer Vanessa's role became. She wasn't running the operation. Desmond still occupied the center. But she appeared repeatedly whenever approvals, reviews, or legal oversight became necessary. Not enough to prove wrongdoing, more than enough to raise questions. Then another realization hit me. My mother doesn't know. Rebecca looked surprised. How can you be sure? Because if she knew, she would have bragged about it. Rebecca laughed despite herself. The answer sounded ridiculous, but it was true. My mother loved celebrating success. If she knew Vanessa was helping manage critical financial matters, she would have told everyone. The secrecy suggested something different. Desmond wasn't just hiding problems from investors, he was hiding them from his own family, which meant his situation might be worse than we realized. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, Rebecca finally located the document she'd been searching for all day. The moment she found it, her entire expression changed. There it is. My pulse accelerated immediately. What? She turned the screen toward me. A lender compliance schedule appeared. Multiple obligations were listed alongside reporting deadlines and performance requirements. Most of it looked technical. Then I saw the dates. My stomach dropped. How many days? Rebecca checked her notes. 18. 18 days. Not months. Not next quarter. 18 days. Suddenly, every decision Desmond made over the past year looked different. He wasn't planning for the future. He was racing toward a deadline. Every secret meeting, every missing document, every pressure campaign, every manipulation connected back to the same reality. Time was running out. Then Rebecca found something that worried her even more. A scheduled private meeting involving several investors, financial representatives, and entities connected to Desmond's restructuring efforts. The meeting wasn't public. It wasn't advertised. Yet there it was, confirmed through multiple records. I leaned forward. When? Rebecca checked the schedule. Next week. Where? She gave me the location. My pulse accelerated again. Because I recognized it immediately. One of the most exclusive private business clubs in the city. The kind of place where major deals happened quietly. The kind of place where people met when they didn't want attention. What's the purpose? I asked. Rebecca shook her head. That part isn't listed. But we both knew. Nobody schedules a meeting like that 18 days before critical debt deadlines unless something important is happening. Then Rebecca pointed toward another name on the attendee list. My stomach dropped. Desmond. A second name followed. Vanessa. Then a third. One I hadn't expected. Darius Walker. The room suddenly felt very quiet. The same 3 people who had appeared throughout the investigation were now preparing for a closed-door meeting days before the most important financial deadline of Desmond's life. This wasn't coincidence anymore. It was coordination. Deliberate coordination. I stared at the attendee list while pieces of the puzzle locked into place. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't months away. It wasn't theoretical. It was happening now. Rebecca slowly closed the folder and looked directly at me. Camille. What? I think this meeting is their endgame. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I looked back at the list one final time. 18 days before everything collapsed. A private meeting. Secret participants. Carter Plaza sitting at the center of the board. For weeks, I'd been following clues left behind by other people. For the first time, I knew exactly where they were going. The question was whether I could get there before they did. I expected to hear lies when I walked into that private business club. What I didn't expect was to hear what the people closest to me actually thought of me when they believed I wasn't in the room. Looking back, that meeting hurt more than discovering the debt, the missing documents, or even Darius's betrayal. Financial fraud can be explained. Greed can be explained. What I heard that afternoon was something worse: contempt. The kind that grows quietly over years until people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as an obstacle. Rebecca thought attending the meeting was a terrible idea. She was probably right. But after weeks of chasing clues, I needed to hear the truth directly from the people creating the problem. I arrived early and blended into a networking event taking place elsewhere in the building. 40 minutes later, I found myself standing near a service corridor adjacent to the conference room. The door wasn't fully closed. Voices drifted through the opening. At first, the conversation sounded exactly as I expected: financial projections, loan structures, deadlines, investor concerns. Then my name entered the discussion. Everything changed. One investor asked a simple question: what level of ownership resistance should we expect? Several seconds passed before Desmond answered. Minimal. The investor didn't sound convinced. What about Camille Carter? Silence followed. Then I heard Desmond laugh. Not nervously. Not politely. The kind of laugh people use when they think a question is ridiculous. Camille isn't going to stop anything. Several people chuckled. My stomach tightened. Desmond continued. She's spent her entire life avoiding these conversations. More laughter followed. She doesn't understand corporate structures, debt instruments, or restructuring strategy. She works construction. The room laughed again. I stood frozen. Not because the words surprised me. Because they sounded familiar. My mother had spent years reducing my entire life to that single fact. She works construction, as though building companies, managing projects, employing workers, and solving problems somehow made me less intelligent than people who sat in offices. Then another voice joined the conversation. Vanessa. To be fair, she said, Camille has never shown much interest in understanding how any of this works. Several people laughed again. My jaw tightened. Because Vanessa knew that wasn't true. She knew I wasn't invited into many of those conversations. She knew I trusted family members who claimed they were handling things honestly. She knew exactly how much information had been hidden from me. Yet there she was, helping sell the lie. One investor spoke again. Could she challenge the transition legally? Vanessa answered before Desmond could. Not realistically. The confidence in her voice made my blood boil. Most of the important decisions were made years ago. Years ago. During meetings I wasn't told about. Using documents I never saw. Using authority I was never given a chance to exercise. Yet somehow they were presenting that history as proof I didn't matter. Then came the moment that hurt most. Darius spoke. For a brief second, some irrational part of me hoped he would push back. Correct the record. Defend me. Say something decent. Instead, he laughed. Camille trusts people too easily. The room grew quiet as he continued. That's always been her weakness. My chest tightened so hard it almost hurt to breathe. Because unlike the others, Darius knew exactly what that sentence meant. He knew trust wasn't a weakness. It was the reason this entire situation existed. I trusted my family. I trusted him. And he had weaponized that trust against me. Another investor asked whether I would object once I learned the details. Darius answered before anyone else. By the time she understands what's happening, it'll already be done. Several people nodded. Someone made a joke about paperwork moving faster than family arguments. More laughter followed. I stood there listening to strangers laugh about my future, listening to people discuss my father's legacy as though I didn't exist, listening to the man I planned to marry explain why I wouldn't be able to stop them. Then Desmond shifted the conversation toward Carter Plaza itself. This was the first time I heard the real plan explained openly. Not every detail, just enough. Complete control of Carter Plaza would unlock financing options unavailable elsewhere. Existing obligations could be restructured. Investors could be reassured. Deadlines could be extended. The entire rescue strategy depended on a single assumption: that control of the property would eventually belong to him. One investor asked a question that changed the atmosphere immediately. And if it doesn't? Silence filled the room. For the first time all afternoon, nobody laughed, nobody joked, nobody sounded confident. Then Desmond answered quietly, "It will." The certainty in his voice bothered me more than anything else I'd heard. Not because he sounded optimistic, because he sounded prepared, as though alternative outcomes had already been removed from consideration. Another investor pushed further. "That's not what I asked." Several seconds passed, then Desmond finally spoke. "If the transfer fails, we have bigger problems." No numbers followed, no explanations. Yet the room immediately understood what he meant. The conversation moved on, but the mood had changed. The investors weren't discussing opportunity anymore. They were discussing survival. Then I noticed something else. Several people in the room appeared uncomfortable. Not because of me. Because they didn't seem aware of the full situation. They were receiving carefully selected information, just enough to support the plan, not enough to understand the risks. The realization mattered. Desmond wasn't only manipulating family members, he was manipulating investors too. That meant his position was weaker than he wanted everyone to believe. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes. During that time, I heard my name mentioned 6 more times. Every mention carried the same theme: naive, uninformed, harmless, predictable. By the end, I understood something important. None of them feared me. Not Desmond, not Vanessa, not Darius. They had spent so many years underestimating me that they couldn't imagine a world where I became a threat, and that arrogance was about to become their biggest mistake. As attendees began gathering their materials, I prepared to leave. That's when I noticed a meeting packet abandoned near a side table used by catering staff. I moved quickly, slipped the packet into my bag, and walked away before anyone noticed. My hands were shaking by the time I reached my car. Not because I was scared, because I was furious. For years, I thought the worst thing my family did was exclude me. I was wrong. The worst thing they did was decide who I was and refuse to see anything else. They convinced themselves I was too simple to understand what was happening, too trusting to ask questions, too insignificant to matter. As I opened the packet and reviewed the documents inside, one page immediately caught my attention: a restructuring summary tied directly to Carter Plaza. Not enough to destroy Desmond. Not yet. But enough to prove that everything Rebecca and I suspected was true. Carter Plaza wasn't one piece of the plan. It was the entire plan. I stared at the documents while Desmond's words replayed inside my head. "She won't be a problem." For the first time since this investigation began, I smiled, because the man who thought he had already won had no idea I had just heard every word. I spent less than 10 minutes feeling satisfied after leaving the private business club. Not because I wasn't angry, I was. Hearing Desmond, Vanessa, and Darius talk about me like I was too stupid to understand my own future had created a level of rage I hadn't felt in years. But anger doesn't stop people like them. Evidence does. By the time I reached Rebecca's office, I was already thinking about the meeting packet sitting in my bag. Somewhere inside those pages was a weakness. There had to be. Desmond's entire plan depended on too many moving parts for everything to be perfect. The question was whether we could find the crack before he reached the finish line. Rebecca spent nearly an hour reviewing the packet. Most of it confirmed what we already knew. Carter Plaza wasn't a side project. It wasn't one asset among many. It was the foundation holding everything together. Without it, the refinancing strategy failed. Without it, lenders would become aggressive. Without it, investors would start asking questions nobody wanted to answer. Every road led back to the same destination: Carter Plaza. "He's more desperate than we thought," Rebecca finally said. "How much more?" She turned one of the pages toward me. Several projected restructuring scenarios were listed side by side. Each version assumed the same thing: full operational control of Carter Plaza. My stomach tightened. "What happens if he doesn't get it?" Rebecca pointed toward another section. The answer was immediate. Revenue projections collapsed. Financing assumptions disappeared. Debt ratios deteriorated. Several agreements moved into high-risk territory. "This isn't a growth plan," I said quietly. Rebecca nodded. "It's a survival plan." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then I noticed something unusual near the back of the packet: a reference number. A supporting approval requirement attached to one of the proposed transfer structures. It wasn't highlighted. It wasn't discussed during the meeting. In fact, It looked so ordinary most people would probably ignore it. Rebecca didn't. Wait. She pulled the page closer. That's interesting. My pulse accelerated. What? Rebecca continued reading. Then she looked up. I think they still need something. The room suddenly felt smaller. Need what? She flipped through several pages before locating the supporting documentation. Then she smiled for the first time all afternoon. Authority. I leaned forward. Explain. Rebecca pointed toward the transfer framework. The structure they're planning doesn't become fully effective unless a final authorization requirement is satisfied. My heart started pounding. Meaning? Meaning they're not finished. For weeks, Desmond felt untouchable. Every discovery revealed another layer of planning, another advantage, another secret meeting, another manipulation. Yet sitting there in Rebecca's office, I finally saw something different. He wasn't standing at the finish line. He was still trying to reach it. Can he get the approval? I asked. Rebecca considered the question carefully. Possibly. Not exactly comforting. But, she tapped the document again. But not automatically. That single word changed everything. Not automatically. For the first time since this investigation began, I wasn't looking at a completed scheme. I was looking at a scheme still in progress. A plan that could potentially be interrupted. A plan with vulnerabilities. A plan that still depended on certain events unfolding exactly as expected, and that meant Desmond could fail. The realization energized me more than I expected. Up until now, every move had been defensive. Gathering records, following money, confirming suspicions, reacting. For the first time, I started thinking about offense, not revenge. Strategy. If Desmond needed a final authorization, then every person connected to that authorization became important. Every procedure became important. Every timeline became important. Rebecca and I spent the next 2 days tracing the approval process from beginning to end. The more we learned, the more obvious the weakness became. Desmond's plan relied heavily on speed. Investors expected progress. Lenders expected progress. Deadlines expected progress. Any delay created pressure. Any disruption created questions. Questions were dangerous because questions led to documents. Documents led to scrutiny. Scrutiny led to problems. Then Rebecca found the opening. A completely legal procedural review option connected to one of the governance requirements tied to Carter Plaza. The review rarely happened. Most people never used it. But it existed. And once triggered, certain approvals could not move forward until additional examination occurred. I stared at the regulation summary for nearly a minute. This is real? Rebecca nodded. Completely. Legal? Completely. Can anyone request it? Rebecca smiled. Not anyone. My pulse accelerated. Can I? She slid the paperwork toward me. Yes. For several seconds, I simply looked at the document. There it was. Not a magic solution. Not a guaranteed victory. Just a legitimate mechanism built into the process itself. The kind of safeguard my father would have appreciated. The kind of safeguard people ignore until they desperately wish they hadn't. The next morning, I filed the request. No dramatic confrontation. No threats. No press releases. No accusations. Just paperwork. Properly submitted. Properly documented. Completely legal. When it was done, nothing looked different. The city continued moving. Investors continued working. Desmond continued planning. No alarms sounded. No headlines appeared. On the surface, nothing changed. Beneath the surface, everything changed. 3 days later, Rebecca called while I was reviewing project estimates at my office. It worked. I sat upright immediately. What happened? The review was accepted. My heart pounded. And? Certain approvals just stopped moving forward. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I had won. I hadn't. Desmond remained dangerous. His plan remained active. His deadlines remained real. But for the first time, the pressure wasn't flowing in only one direction. Now he felt it too. Later that afternoon, another call came. This time not from Rebecca, from a financial contact she'd been monitoring. The information was brief but important. A scheduled procedural step connected to Desmond's restructuring effort had unexpectedly stalled. No public explanation accompanied the delay. No one seemed to understand why it happened, except me and Rebecca. That evening, I sat at my dining room table reviewing notes when my phone buzzed again. An industry contact forwarded a message circulating quietly among people involved in the transaction. Apparently, the delay had created concern. Questions were being asked. Timelines were being reviewed. Meetings were being rescheduled. For the first time, uncertainty had entered the process. Then another message arrived. This one came from someone inside Desmond's circle. Just a single observation, nothing more. Yet it made me smile immediately. Desmond had lost his temper during a conference call. According to the source, he demanded explanations nobody could provide. He wanted answers. He wanted names. He wanted the process moving again. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't getting what he wanted. I set the phone down and stared at my father's documents spread across the table. Desmond still believed I was harmless. Vanessa still believed I didn't understand the game. Darius still believed I would always be one step behind. None of them knew a single procedural request had already forced their plan off schedule. But what happened next worried me more than the delay itself. Because desperate people don't react calmly when their plans begin falling apart. They react aggressively. And as I looked at the 18-day countdown written across my notes, I realized something important. I had finally hit Desmond back, which meant sooner or later, he was going to hit back too. For the first time since this investigation began, I knew I had hurt Desmond. Not destroyed his plan, not exposed him publicly, just hurt him. The procedural review Rebecca and I triggered had delayed part of his timeline, created questions among investors, and forced important approvals into uncertainty. It wasn't a victory, it was a warning shot. The problem with warning shots is that they work both ways. If I knew Desmond was vulnerable, Desmond now knew someone was interfering. The only question was how long it would take him to start looking for the person responsible. The answer turned out to be less than 48 hours. Rebecca called early Monday morning. Something changed. I immediately sat up. What happened? I've been monitoring communications around the restructuring effort. Her voice sounded unusually serious. People are panicking. That wasn't what I expected. Concern? Maybe. Frustration? Definitely. Panic was different. An hour later, I sat across from her reviewing summaries of conversations taking place inside Desmond's circle. Several meetings had been rescheduled. Investor calls were running longer. Advisors were asking questions. Lenders wanted updates. The delay wasn't catastrophic, but it had created uncertainty. And uncertainty is expensive when you're already standing on the edge of a financial cliff. Then Rebecca showed me something that made me smile for the first time in days. Desmond had called an emergency internal meeting. Attendees included Vanessa, Darius, several advisors, and a handful of people connected to the restructuring effort. They weren't discussing expansion anymore. They were trying to identify who had interfered with the process. He's scared, I said quietly. Rebecca nodded. More than I expected. For years, my family treated Desmond like a man who always had answers. The brilliant son, the successful businessman, the natural leader. Nobody ever talked about fear. Nobody ever talked about weakness. Yet beneath all the confidence, the reality looked different. Desmond wasn't acting like a man in control. He was acting like a man running out of time. 2 days later, I received confirmation of that fact in the most unexpected way possible. One of Rebecca's industry contacts managed to obtain information about the emergency meeting. Not recordings, not transcripts, just summaries. That was enough. According to multiple sources, the meeting quickly turned into an argument. Advisors blamed delays. Investors blamed communication failures. Vanessa blamed outside interference. Darius blamed procedural complications. Desmond blamed everyone. The image almost felt surreal. For most of my life, Desmond walked into rooms expecting obedience. Now people were questioning him, challenging him, demanding answers. The pressure was finally reaching him. Then Rebecca showed me the part that mattered most. Vanessa had proposed a solution. My stomach tightened immediately. What kind of solution? Rebecca handed me her notes. I read them twice, then a third time. Vanessa's recommendation was simple. Remove the problem. Not financially, not legally, socially, professionally. personally. According to the summaries, she argued that I was becoming unpredictable, that my recent actions were creating unnecessary complications, that someone needed to convince me to back away before the situation became worse. My jaw tightened. Convince me? Rebecca looked at me carefully. That word can mean a lot of things. Unfortunately, I knew my family well enough to understand exactly what it meant. Not violence, not threats, pressure, isolation, reputation damage. The kind of tactics people use when they want to avoid leaving fingerprints. The realization made my stomach turn, because Vanessa wasn't simply protecting Desmond anymore. She was actively participating. She wasn't following. She was contributing. For weeks I wondered how involved she really was. Now I had my answer. Then my phone rang. The caller ID made my blood run cold. Mother. For several seconds I stared at the screen. We rarely spoke anymore. Not because I hated her, because every conversation eventually turned into criticism. Somehow, I already knew this call wouldn't be different. I answered anyway. Hello? Her voice sounded unusually warm. That should have been my first warning sign. Camille, sweetheart, how are you? Sweetheart. My mother only used that tone when she wanted something. What do you need? Several seconds of silence followed. Then the real conversation began. I've been hearing some concerning things. There it was. I closed my eyes briefly. Such as? People are saying you're creating problems. My grip tightened around the phone. People? Your family. Of course. Desmond is under enormous pressure right now. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the predictability felt absurd. Months of deception, years of manipulation, missing documents, hidden debt, and somehow I was the problem. My mother continued. You need to stop whatever you're doing. The words landed harder than I expected, not because they surprised me, because some small part of me still hoped she would ask questions first. Did Desmond tell you that? I asked. Desmond is trying to protect this family. There it was. The answer I already knew. My entire life could be summarized in that sentence. Desmond explains. Mother believes. Conversation over. Do you know what he's been hiding? I asked quietly. I know he's trying to save what your father built. The irony nearly took my breath away. Because my father built safeguards specifically to prevent what Desmond was doing. Yet somehow my mother couldn't see it. Or refused to. Mom! My voice sounded tired even to me. If you knew the truth, she interrupted immediately. I know enough. That hurt. More than I expected. Not because she disagreed with me. Because she never asked for my side. Not once. The conversation ended 10 minutes later exactly the way it always did. My mother defending Desmond. Me saying goodbye. Nothing resolved. Everything worse. When I hung up, I sat alone in my kitchen staring at the phone. For a moment, I wasn't thinking about debt, or Carter Plaza, or investors. I was thinking about family, about how many opportunities people receive to choose who they believe. My mother had chosen, just like Darius had chosen, just like Vanessa had chosen. The next attack arrived 3 days later. This time it targeted my business. A long-term commercial client unexpectedly postponed a contract renewal. Then another client delayed a project review. Then a third stopped returning calls altogether. Individually, none of it seemed unusual. Together, it felt wrong. Rebecca noticed the pattern before I did. Someone's talking. My stomach tightened. About me? She nodded. Probably. We couldn't prove it. Not immediately. But the timing was impossible to ignore. The moment Desmond's plans encountered resistance, pressure began appearing in my professional life. Exactly the kind of pressure Vanessa recommended. The message was clear. If they couldn't stop the investigation directly, they would make continuing it more expensive, more uncomfortable, more isolated. The strategy worked better than I wanted to admit. For several days, I found myself questioning everything. Not the evidence, the cost. How much damage was I willing to absorb before the truth finally surfaced? Then Rebecca called late Friday afternoon. Her voice sounded different. Excited. Focused. Dangerous. I think I found something. My pulse accelerated immediately. What? Remember the inheritance amendment with the questionable signature? I sat upright. Of course. I found a related records trail. Every nerve in my body came alive. What does that mean? Rebecca paused. Then she delivered the sentence that changed everything. "I think I can prove someone modified estate documents after your father died." Silence filled the room. For several seconds I couldn't speak. Because if she was right, this wasn't about suspicious behavior anymore. This wasn't about hidden debt. This wasn't even about manipulation. It was evidence. Real evidence. The kind that could destroy everything Desmond spent years building. The kind that could explain how so many safeguards disappeared at the exact moment he needed them gone. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized we might finally be getting close to the truth they were actually afraid of. The breakthrough arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 11 days before Desmond's deadline. After weeks of chasing fragments, assumptions, and suspicious patterns, Rebecca finally called with something different. Certainty. I knew it from the moment I heard her voice. She wasn't cautious. She wasn't speculative. She wasn't asking questions. She had answers. I left work immediately and drove straight to her office. The second I walked through the door, I saw 3 thick folders stacked neatly across the conference table. Every page was covered with notes, timestamps, filing references, and document comparisons. Rebecca looked exhausted, but she also looked satisfied. "Tell me you found it," I said. She nodded. "I found more than I expected." My pulse accelerated. For several seconds, I couldn't sit down. Weeks of investigation had led to this moment. Missing inheritance protections, hidden debt, secret meetings, altered authority structures. Everything pointed toward a single question. Had someone deliberately changed estate records after my father died? Rebecca opened the first folder. I started by reconstructing the document history. She slid several pages toward me. Different versions, different filing dates, different submissions. At first glance, the records looked identical. Then she highlighted specific sections. Small changes, modified language, removed provisions, missing oversight requirements. Safeguards quietly disappearing over time. My stomach tightened. These weren't in the originals? Rebecca shook her head. No. I stared at the pages. The protections my father created weren't accidentally omitted. They had existed. Someone removed them, deliberately, methodically, piece by piece. "Can you prove it?" I asked. Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened a second folder and handed me another set of documents. "Look at the metadata history." My eyes moved across filing records, submission logs, and revision references. Then I saw it. A sequence of updates occurring months after my father's death. Not corrections, not clerical adjustments, structural modifications. The exact safeguards my father requested had been altered after he was gone. My chest tightened. "This is real?" Rebecca nodded. "Completely." For several moments I couldn't speak, because suspicion is one thing, proof is another. For weeks I believed something had happened. Now I was staring at evidence showing it actually had. Someone modified estate-related authority records after my father died. The realization felt both satisfying and devastating. Satisfying because I wasn't imagining things. Devastating because it meant the betrayal was real. Then Rebecca opened the third folder. This is where it gets worse. My stomach dropped immediately. Worse was becoming a dangerous word. She placed several authorization records side by side. Names appeared throughout the approval chain: administrative reviewers, legal personnel, filing coordinators. Then I saw a familiar name: Vanessa Carter. My pulse accelerated. No. Rebecca pointed directly at the entry. She wasn't a bystander. I stared at the page. Vanessa's involvement wasn't theoretical anymore. Her name appeared during critical stages connected to revised filings. Not once, multiple times. Review, authorization, verification. She wasn't observing the process. She was participating in it. Every defense I tried constructing disappeared immediately. There was no innocent explanation left. No misunderstanding. No coincidence. Vanessa helped move the changes forward. The cousin who pretended neutrality, the attorney who acted above family politics, the woman who spent years presenting herself as the reasonable one. She wasn't standing on the sidelines. She was inside the operation. How much did she know? I asked quietly. Rebecca looked at me. Enough. The answer landed hard. Because it meant Vanessa watched protections disappear, and chose to continue anyway. Then Rebecca showed me another timeline. This one focused on communication records and meeting histories. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Desmond appeared repeatedly, Vanessa appeared repeatedly, and so did Darius. My jaw tightened. You're telling me he knew? Rebecca folded her arms. I can't prove he helped change the records. She paused. But I can prove he knew discussions were happening. For several seconds I simply stared at the documents. Darius spent months pretending ignorance, pretending concern, pretending loyalty, all while participating in conversations surrounding decisions that directly affected me. The betrayal somehow felt fresh all over again, not because it was new, because the scale kept growing. Every answer exposed another lie beneath it. Then Rebecca pointed toward a section I almost missed. Look at the beneficiaries. I frowned. Beneficiaries? She nodded. Everyone assumes this was only about helping Desmond. My stomach tightened immediately. It wasn't? Rebecca slowly shook her head. The financial restructuring summaries, authority changes, and ownership projections all pointed toward the same conclusion. If Desmond secured complete control of Carter Plaza, he wasn't the only person who benefited. Several individuals positioned around him benefited too. Consulting contracts, legal retainers, management agreements, future oversight positions, revenue participation structures. My pulse accelerated. Vanessa, Rebecca nodded. Among others. Suddenly, the entire story looked different. For weeks, I believed everyone was helping Desmond survive. The truth was uglier. They weren't simply protecting him. They were protecting themselves. Desmond wasn't the center of the conspiracy. He was the center of a network of people expecting rewards if the plan succeeded. The realization made my stomach turn. Because greed is predictable. Collective greed is dangerous. Then something else finally clicked into place. My father knew. Not the details, not the names, but the risk. That's why he built safeguards into the structure. He understood what happened when too much authority concentrated around too few people. The protections weren't paperwork. They were warnings. And after he died, someone quietly dismantled them. I spent nearly an hour reviewing the evidence. Every page strengthened the same conclusion. By the time I finished, the question wasn't whether wrongdoing occurred. The question was how much. Then Rebecca leaned forward. There's something else. I looked up. Please tell me that's the last surprise today. She almost smiled. Not even close. She handed me another file. Inside sat information about an upcoming public event scheduled less than 2 weeks away. Investors, business leaders, community organizations, local media. Several major stakeholders connected to Carter Plaza. The guest list stretched for pages. My pulse accelerated as I continued reading. Then I saw the featured speaker, Desmond Carter. Of course. Rebecca watched me carefully. Recognize it? I nodded slowly. Everyone in the city knew the event. A high-profile business leadership forum held every year. Public speeches, investor presentations, press coverage, networking opportunities. The kind of event where successful people celebrated themselves in front of cameras. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed the evidence folders side by side. Altered records, Vanessa's involvement, Darius's knowledge, ownership manipulation, missing safeguards. Then she pointed toward the event schedule. Suddenly I understood. If the evidence held up under final verification, Desmond's greatest strength could become his greatest weakness. He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was preparing to stand in front of investors, reporters, business leaders, and community figures while presenting himself as the man who saved the family empire. My pulse accelerated. Not because of what had happened, because of what might happen next. For weeks we chased evidence. For weeks we reacted. For weeks we defended ourselves. Sitting in Rebecca's office, staring at those folders, I realized the balance was beginning to shift. Desmond still didn't know exactly what we had. Vanessa still thought the records were buried. Darius still believed I was one step behind. But for the first time, I could see a path forward. A real one. Not survival. Exposure, not defense. Accountability. Rebecca closed the final folder and looked directly at me. If we're right, she said quietly, that event could change everything. I looked down at the evidence spread across the table. 11 days remained before Desmond's deadline. 11 days before his rescue plan either succeeded or collapsed. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't wondering how to stop him. I was wondering how public his downfall was about to become. The hardest decision I made during the entire investigation wasn't whether to expose Desmond. It was deciding not to expose him immediately. By the time Rebecca finished verifying the altered estate records, we had enough evidence to create serious problems. Not enough to guarantee victory, but enough to start a war. Every instinct told me to release everything. To confront Desmond. To confront Vanessa. To force answers. Instead, Rebecca convinced me to do something much harder. Wait. If you move now, she said, they'll retreat. I hated that she was right. Desmond had spent years building layers of protection around himself. If he sensed the full scope of what we discovered, he would adapt, delay, reposition, redirect blame. Men like Desmond survived because they understood timing. If I wanted the truth to matter, I needed to understand timing too. That meant waiting for the event. The Business Leadership Forum wasn't just another speaking engagement. The closer we looked, the more important it became. Investors would attend. Community leaders would attend. Business reporters would attend. More importantly, several people connected to the Carter Plaza restructuring would attend. Desmond planned to stand in front of all of them and present himself as a visionary leader guiding a successful transition. The irony almost made me laugh. He was preparing a victory speech while standing on top of evidence that could destroy him. During the following week, Rebecca and I focused entirely on preparation, not investigation. Preparation. Every document was reviewed. Every timeline was verified. Every filing reference was cross-checked. We weren't looking for more evidence anymore. We were making sure nobody could attack the evidence we already had. The process felt painfully slow, but for the first time, I understood why lawyers move carefully. Winning isn't about being first, it's about being right. Meanwhile, Desmond appeared more confident than ever. Local business publications published articles about the upcoming forum. Promotional materials highlighted him as one of the featured speakers. Social media posts described him as a successful entrepreneur helping shape the future of the city. Every glowing description made me angrier. Not because people admired him, because they were admiring a version of him that didn't exist. Then Vanessa made a mistake. According to information Rebecca received from industry contacts, Vanessa began pressuring people connected to the restructuring process. Hard. Too hard. She wanted guarantees. She wanted commitments. She wanted certainty. The behavior told us something important. Vanessa was nervous. Confident people don't pressure everyone around them. Nervous people do. The closer the deadline approached, the more aggressive she became. Which meant she understood the risk almost as well as Desmond did. 3 days before the forum, my mother called again. I almost ignored it. Almost. Something told me I shouldn't. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. It permanently changed how I viewed our relationship. You still have time to stop this, she said. No greeting, no small talk. Straight to the point. Stop what? I asked. Whatever you're doing. There it was again. The assumption that I was the problem. Not the altered records. Not the hidden debt. Not the years of deception. Me. I closed my eyes briefly. Mom, do you even know what's happening? I know you're hurting your brother. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were cruel, because they were final. For years, some part of me believed that if enough evidence existed, my mother would eventually see the truth. That illusion finally died during that phone call. Evidence wasn't the issue. Desmond wasn't the issue. Her decision had been made years ago. What if he's wrong? I asked quietly. He's not. The answer arrived instantly. No hesitation, no thought, just certainty. I felt something inside me finally let go. Not anger, not sadness, hope. Hope that she might someday choose fairness over loyalty. Hope that she might ask questions before taking sides. Hope that she might see me the way she saw Desmond. When the call ended, I didn't feel devastated. I felt free. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for my mother's approval. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. Both were brief. Both were deliberate. Neither involved Desmond. Neither involved Vanessa. Neither involved Darius. Rebecca didn't ask many questions. She didn't need to. Are they coming? she asked. If everything goes according to plan. She smiled slightly. Then things are about to get interesting. The truth was that Desmond wasn't the only person preparing for the forum. He just didn't know it. While he rehearsed speeches and coordinated presentations, I quietly contacted individuals whose presence could become very important if the right questions were asked publicly. I wasn't building a trap. Desmond built that himself years ago. I was simply making sure the right people were standing nearby when it closed. The day before the event arrived faster than expected. By then, the city was buzzing about the forum. Investors were arriving. Speakers were checking schedules. Local media outlets were promoting coverage. Everything looked normal from the outside. Underneath, pressure was building everywhere. 11 days had become 10, 10 became 9. The countdown continued moving toward Desmond, whether he was ready or not. That evening, I sat alone reviewing notes one final time. Every major discovery from the investigation stretched across my dining room table. The missing safeguards, the altered records, Vanessa's involvement, Darius's knowledge, the restructuring plan, the hidden debt. For a moment, I thought about my father, about how differently all of this might have unfolded if he had lived another year. Then my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Silence greeted me at first. Then a voice spoke. Older, calm, careful. Camille? My pulse accelerated immediately. Who is this? Several seconds passed. Then the caller gave a name I hadn't heard in years, a name connected directly to my father, a name I never expected to hear again. We need to talk, he said quietly. It's about your father. Every nerve in my body came alive. What about him? Another pause followed. There's something he discovered before he died. The room suddenly felt very still, because after everything Rebecca and I uncovered, after all the altered records and hidden plans and family betrayals, I thought I finally understood the story. The voice on the phone suggested I was wrong. And as I stared at the countdown sitting beside my notes, I realized one more secret was about to enter the game just days before everything exploded. The morning of the Business Leadership Forum arrived with the kind of confidence only people like Desmond could possess. 11 days earlier, his world had started cracking beneath him. Yet as I watched attendees arrive at the convention center, he carried himself exactly the way he always had. Expensive suit, perfect smile, firm handshakes. The image of a man completely in control. If someone had walked into that building without knowing the truth, they would have believed every word written about him. Successful entrepreneur, community leader, visionary businessman. The problem was that images only survive until reality catches up. By noon, the main ballroom was nearly full. Investors filled the front rows, local business leaders occupied reserved tables. Reporters moved between cameras and media stations. Community organizations and sponsors mingled throughout the room. Near the center of the audience sat my mother, proud, smiling, looking exactly the way she always looked whenever Desmond stood on a stage. A few rows away sat Vanessa, calm, confident, completely unaware that the evidence Rebecca and I spent weeks assembling was already sitting in my bag. Darius wasn't smiling as much as the others. He looked tense, restless, maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe instinct. Whatever the reason, he seemed like the only person in the room who sensed something was wrong. Then Desmond stepped onto the stage. The applause arrived immediately. He accepted it the way he accepted everything else, as though it belonged to him. The presentation lasted nearly 30 minutes. Growth projections, economic development, business leadership, community investment. Every carefully polished sentence made me angrier. Not because the speech was bad, because it was effective. Desmond knew how to sell confidence. He knew how to make people believe. He knew how to package ambition as leadership. By the time he finished, the audience rewarded him with another round of applause. Then the moderator opened the floor for questions. For several moments, everything proceeded normally. Investors asked about market conditions. Business owners asked about expansion opportunities. Reporters asked about future projects. Desmond answered each one smoothly. Calm, relaxed, in control. Then I stood up. At first, nobody noticed. I was just another attendee waiting for a microphone. Then Desmond looked toward the audience and saw me. The change was almost invisible. Almost. But I saw it. A brief pause. A slight tightening around his eyes. For the first time all afternoon, he looked surprised. The microphone reached me. The room fell quiet. "Mr. Carter," I said, "can you explain why estate authority records connected to Carter Plaza were modified after our father's death?" Every sound inside the ballroom disappeared. Desmond's smile froze. Not vanished. Froze. The difference mattered. He wasn't prepared for the question. He was deciding how to answer it. Several seconds passed. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." The lie arrived smoothly. Too smoothly. I expected that. "Then perhaps I can help." I removed several documents from my folder. Nearby attendees immediately began looking toward me. So did reporters. So did investors. Suddenly, the room cared very much about my question. These records show governance protections included by our father, protections that later disappeared. A murmur moved through the audience. Desmond's expression hardened. This isn't the appropriate venue for family disagreements. There it was. The strategy. Make it emotional. Make it personal. Make it look like family drama instead of documented facts. Unfortunately for him, facts were exactly what I brought. It's not a family disagreement. I held up another document. It's a filing history. The moderator looked uncomfortable. Several investors looked concerned. Reporters started writing. Desmond's confidence began slipping. Just slightly, but enough. Then I revealed the second set of records. Revision dates, submission histories, metadata trails, evidence showing critical changes occurring after my father's death. The atmosphere inside the room shifted immediately. People weren't listening politely anymore. They were paying attention. One investor stood. "Is this accurate?" Desmond answered instantly. "The documents are being misinterpreted." Another lie. Faster this time. Less polished. I continued anyway. "Then maybe we should discuss who participated in those revisions." I turned another page. Vanessa's name appeared clearly within the authorization trail. For the first time all afternoon, Vanessa lost control of her expression. Not dramatically, just enough. A flash of panic. Gone almost immediately, but visible. The audience noticed. More importantly, the investors noticed. Questions started arriving from every direction. What revisions? Who approved them? Why weren't stakeholders informed? The moderator completely lost control of the session. Desmond attempted to regain momentum. "These are technical matters being presented without context." Another strong answer. Unfortunately, it came too late. Because people had already started asking the most dangerous question in business. Why? Then an investor I recognized from the private meeting stood up. "Were these modifications connected to the restructuring effort?" Silence followed. Real silence. Desmond didn't answer immediately, because he couldn't. Any answer created problems. Another investor spoke before he could recover. Were governance protections removed? Then another. Did investors receive disclosure regarding these changes? Then another. Who benefited? The questions arrived faster than answers. Desmond wasn't leading the room anymore. He was defending himself. Vanessa looked terrified. Darius looked like he wanted to disappear. For the first time since this nightmare began, the people responsible for controlling the narrative had lost control of the narrative. Then I revealed the final document. The restructuring summary. The same document proving Carter Plaza sat at the center of the rescue strategy. "This wasn't about preserving our father's legacy," I said. "It was about preserving debt structures tied to a failing financial network." Audible reactions spread throughout the room. Investors exchanged looks. Reporters stopped pretending this was a routine conference. Even people with no connection to the story understood something significant was happening. Then I saw my mother. For the first time all day, she wasn't smiling. She wasn't proud. She wasn't confident. She looked confused. The certainty she'd carried for years was finally beginning to crack. Desmond attempted one final recovery. "Camille doesn't understand the full picture." The sentence might have worked weeks earlier. It failed completely now. Too many people had seen too much. Too many questions remained unanswered. Then a voice echoed from the rear of the ballroom. "Actually, she understands more than you think." Every head turned, including mine. An older man slowly walked forward. Calm. Composed. Familiar. the voice from the phone call. The man who contacted me the night before. He stopped near the front of the room and looked directly at Desmond. Your father warned people this might happen. The room became completely silent. The man reached into his briefcase and removed a folder. Because he discovered concerns about control, influence, and future manipulation long before he died. Desmond's face went pale. Not nervous. Not uncomfortable. Pale. The kind of expression people make when they realize a problem they thought was buried forever just walked into the room. And in that moment, standing in front of investors, reporters, business leaders, and the family members who spent years underestimating me, I knew Desmond finally understood something. His empire hadn't collapsed yet, but for the first time, everyone could see the cracks. The collapse began before the forum even ended. By the time reporters uploaded their first articles, investors were already making phone calls. By the time those calls ended, attorneys were requesting documents. By the following morning, lenders were demanding explanations. For years, Desmond survived because he controlled information. Once the information became public, control disappeared. Everything happened faster than even Rebecca predicted. The investors who had trusted Desmond suddenly discovered they had been making decisions based on incomplete disclosures. The restructuring effort immediately stalled. Independent reviews expanded. Additional records were requested. Meetings were canceled. Funding discussions froze. 11 days before his deadline, the rescue plan that was supposed to save his empire began unraveling in front of everyone. The most painful part for Desmond wasn't the financial damage, it was the humiliation. For years, he carefully built the image of a brilliant businessman. Now, every conversation started with the same question. What else didn't he tell us? Trust vanished almost overnight. Without trust, the entire structure collapsed. Several lenders withdrew support. Investors distanced themselves. Partners who once praised him suddenly stopped returning calls. The empire he spent years protecting wasn't destroyed by me, it was destroyed by the truth. Vanessa's downfall arrived next. Unlike Desmond, she couldn't claim ignorance. The authorization trails were too clear. The records were too specific. Questions quickly spread through legal and professional circles. Review boards requested explanations. Clients started leaving. Colleagues stopped defending her. Her greatest asset had always been credibility. Once credibility disappeared, everything else followed. I heard through mutual contacts that she spent months fighting investigations, disciplinary reviews, and professional scrutiny. Maybe she didn't expect consequences when she signed those approvals. Maybe she convinced herself she was helping family. It didn't matter. Choices have consequences. Eventually, the same signatures that helped protect Desmond became the signatures that damaged her own future. Darius received exactly the outcome he earned. The restructuring plan failed. The executive position he expected never existed. The opportunities he sacrificed our relationship for disappeared with the rest of the scheme. But losing a job opportunity wasn't his punishment. Losing trust was. People eventually recover from financial setbacks. Some reputations never recover. Mutual friends learned what happened. Business contacts learned what happened. The story spread. Not because I told it, because truth travels on its own. Several months after the forum, Darius requested a meeting. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe across town. He looked older than I remembered. Tired, defeated. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally asked the question he came to ask. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I considered it honestly. Maybe. Hope briefly appeared in his eyes. Then I finished the sentence. But that doesn't mean I'll ever trust you again. The hope disappeared. Some consequences don't involve courts. Some involve living with the choices you made. Darius chose ambition over loyalty. Eventually, he had to live with that reality. The hardest outcome belonged to my mother, not because she lost money, not because she lost status, because she lost certainty. For most of her life, the world felt simple. Desmond was right. Desmond was successful. Desmond was the future. Then reality shattered that story. Several weeks after the forum, she visited Carter Plaza for the first time in years. We walked through the property together. Neither of us spoke much. Eventually, she stopped near one of the original photographs showing my father during the building's early construction. She stared at it for a long time. Then she asked a question I never expected to hear. When did I stop seeing what was right in front of me? For several seconds, I didn't know how to answer, because the question wasn't really about Desmond. It was about me. About years of being overlooked. Years of assumptions. Years of choosing one child while failing to understand the other. She never asked for forgiveness. I respected that. Some damage cannot be repaired with a single conversation. But for the first time in my life, she stopped defending Desmond. And for the first time in my life, she started listening. That was enough. The final legal reviews took months to complete. The altered records were eventually corrected. The governance protections my father originally created were restored. Independent oversight returned. Control structures were reestablished exactly the way he intended. Most importantly, Carter Plaza survived. The businesses operating there survived. The employees survived. The families depending on it survived. In the end, that mattered more than any personal victory. Several months later, Martin Ellison invited me to review one final item from my father's records. It wasn't a hidden fortune. It wasn't a secret property. It wasn't another twist. It was a letter. A simple letter written years earlier and stored with estate planning documents. My father wasn't predicting the future. He wasn't naming villains. He was explaining why Carter Plaza mattered. Near the end, one paragraph stopped me cold. He wrote that buildings were easy to replace. Money was easy to replace. What mattered was character, responsibility, judgment. Then came the sentence I will never forget. He wrote that among all his children, I was the one he trusted most to protect people, when protecting people became inconvenient. I read that line 3 times before continuing. For years, I believed Carter Plaza was my inheritance. I was wrong. The building was never the inheritance. The trust was. My father didn't leave me a property because he thought I deserved a reward. He left me responsibility because he believed I would do the right thing when it became difficult. Standing inside the plaza months later, watching tenants open their businesses and employees begin another normal workday, I finally understood what he meant. Desmond wanted ownership. Vanessa wanted influence. Darius wanted opportunity. I wanted answers. In the end, my father left me something far more valuable than any of those things. He left me proof that he knew exactly who I was long before I did. And as I looked across the building he spent his life creating, I realized something that made every fight, every betrayal, and every painful discovery worth enduring. They took almost everything trying to control his legacy. In the end, they lost it. I protected it. And that was the only verdict that mattered.